In this third session of Globe Connect, we're going to think about the issue of life. What is it? What's it for? What's the purpose and meaning of life? I have this thing called life, but what am I supposed to do with it? Is it possible to find a purpose and a meaning that is so deeply satisfying, so fulfilling, that I could get to the end of my life and be content and be full? I mean, that's what we're longing for, isn't it? Well, let me start with this £20 note. It's just a small little rectangle of some plasticky stuff. But it challenges me, it asks me a question. It says, what are you going to do with me? It's my £20, so I've got a number of options. I could tear it into very small strips and make a comfortable bed for a hamster in its cage. Or I could fold it up into a paper aeroplane and have that wonderful sense of exhilaration as I watch my money gently float away on the breeze. Or I could buy myself a new jumper, or my wife a bunch of flowers, or a homeless man a bag of food. How do I decide? How do I decide what is using it well and what is wasting it? And that's just £20. The problem is that we've all been entrusted with something that is more valuable, infinitely more valuable than £20. We've been given life. And it challenges us. What are we going to do with it? How are we going to use this life that we've been given? Will we use it well, or will we waste it? And as we think about these questions of purpose and what we're going to do with our lives, I think there are really two options that I just want us to consider this evening. Firstly, I want us to think about the idea that purpose and meaning is something I get to choose for myself. It's my life. I decide what I do with it. That's option one. Option two is that purpose is not something I decide, but something I discover as I understand the story of this universe and I understand a bigger reality into which I fit. So is purpose something I choose for myself or something I discover and enjoy? Let's start with option number one. I think in many ways this is the overwhelming view of our culture. It seems to us to be blatantly obvious that it's my life and so I get to decide what I do with it. And purpose, therefore, is a self-determined thing. And so we set out in our lives to discover purpose. And we go for pleasure. We enjoy things. We just want to enjoy all that life has to offer. This is what we're told. You've only got one life. Take life by the scruff of the neck. Life is a roller coaster. You've just got to ride it. Go to amazing places, eat amazing food, meet amazing people. Just enjoy life. That's where purpose is to be found. And achieve things. Go and do great things. So train hard and work hard, study hard so that you can achieve wonderful things with your life. And be kind. Show kindness to others. And in those three sorts of areas, that's basically where we're told purpose is to be found. In pleasure, achievement, and kindness. And as long as you can do that, then you'll find some satisfaction. And in many ways, there's truth in that. Each of those three things are good things. And each of those things are things that can bring us some joy and satisfaction. But there is a problem. And the problem is that it will only ever be temporary. It will only ever be limited. So the pleasure that I enjoy, it doesn't last. And it really only lasts for as long as I'm lucky, for as long as life doesn't go wrong, for as long as I don't get sick. And some people in life just get unlucky. It's very hard to say to someone who's really struggling, oh, you've only got one life, just live it. That's the purpose of life. Well, they can't. No, this is a worldview. This is an understanding of life that works well in an affluent society with plenty of opportunities, but doesn't work where people are poor and people are starving. So it's temporary. There's a temporary nature to it. And even our achievements, they don't last. I live in central London. They're constantly pulling down buildings that someone spent their life planning and achieving, and now it's just being torn down. And even our kindness. Yeah, kindness is good, but it doesn't last. There's an amazing book in the Bible, and this might surprise you because often people think the Bible's full of nice, sweet sayings. This is an amazing book in the Bible that talks about this brutal reality of life. And it starts with these words, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. In an ultimate sense, life is meaningless because all of us will die. Because all of this is temporary, it doesn't last. And in 100 years' time, no one will remember your name. And it will make no difference whether you were kind or mean, worked hard or lazy. It won't matter. William Shakespeare caught something of this in his play Macbeth, where there's this amazing quote that says, "Life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." In that book of Ecclesiastes, there's an image of someone chasing the wind. Imagine you saw someone chasing along the street with a great big net and they're swiping it around their head. And you say, "What on earth are you doing?" And they say, "Well, I'm chasing the wind." You'd say, that's a futile thing to do. And yet that's what Ecclesiastes says our lives are often like. We chase after the wind. And most of us have experienced something like that. You go for it, but it doesn't satisfy. You think it's going to fulfill you, but it doesn't fulfill you. And you're always left needing to do more, chasing after the wind. Now, of course, we could just say, well, that's just the way life is. Get over it. Stop being so babyish about it and just accept the way it is. Enjoy life while you've got it, and then you're dead. And if you're unlucky, sorry. But the problem is, we find it very hard to accept that reality. And I wonder if the reason we find it hard, we're given a clue to it in that book of Ecclesiastes. You see, in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, there's this very interesting sentence that I really want you to think about. It says this: God has set eternity in the human heart. So here's the idea. The God who made this world, the God who made us, when he made us, he hardwired eternity into us. That is, we have a sense of something bigger. That even though we die, we sort of know that there's something beyond, something bigger than us, a bigger reality. And that spark of eternity is our problem. That's why we find it so hard to accept that life is just the way it is. Because we feel like there should be more. And so we struggle to accept meaninglessness, and we ache for more. And this is why, over the centuries, hundreds of philosophers have written and thought and questioned and asked about these issues. But I want to cut through all of that and take you to one man. I want to take you to the words of Jesus Christ, who, whatever else you might think of him, was an amazing teacher who turned the world upside down by his teaching. Let's listen to what he said on the subject of meaning. And I love listening to Jesus teach because he doesn't just talk in abstract ideas. He tells stories that we can relate to. Let me tell you one of his stories. There was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger son was restless. He was desperate for purpose and meaning. And he felt trapped and enslaved and frustrated by having to live at home with his father, having to work on the farm. And so one day he said to his father, "Look, can I just have my share of the inheritance now? I want to set out and I want to find my purpose in life." The father gives him his money, and he packs up all his belongings, throws them over his shoulder, turns his back on his father, and sets off. And we're told that he had a great time. He spent all of his money on wild living. He enjoyed life to the full. And if in those moments you could have said to him, was it a good decision to leave? He'd have said, yeah, it was a good decision. I am well satisfied. But the problem was it was temporary. It didn't last. Eventually the money ran out. And suddenly he found himself hungry, and he ended up having to feed pigs in a pigsty. And he was sitting there in this pigsty longing to fill his stomach with what the pigs were eating. He'd gone in search of fullness, but actually had ended up empty. That's a powerful parable for what many of us experience as human beings. We go in search of fullness, but we have moments when we find ourselves empty, frustrated, disappointed. But as he sits there in that pigsty, his mind begins to think, and he remembers his father. He remembers home, and he makes this decision to come home, to set out back to his father. Now, here's where the story gets really beautiful, because back home, the father is waiting and watching, longing, hoping, scouring the horizon every day in the hope that his son might come home. And one day he sees a little figure on the horizon, and he says, could that be my son? And as the figure gets closer, the father's heart swells up with joy as he realizes it's his long-lost son. And he hitches up his robe and he goes running out to meet him. And as the younger son and the father meet, we're told that the father throws his arms around his lost son and kisses him. And it's there, right there, in that moment of embrace. Can you see that that's where fullness is found? Not in choosing for myself and pursuing fullness that I decide, but rather in finding the fullness that I was made for. What the son had looked for himself was actually back home all along. And Jesus told that story so that we could begin to think about this idea of meaning and purpose. So that we might understand there is a God who's made us. Our natural instinct is to say, I'm going to find meaning for myself. And we set off in pursuit of fullness and purpose. But the trouble is, it will only ever be temporary. Yes, we'll find some satisfaction and joy in pleasure and achievements and kindness. Yeah, we'll find some. But the danger is we'll be left feeling empty. And the fullness that we really seek is not found in pursuing our own way, but rather is found in a relationship with the God who made us. That's the whole reason Jesus came. That's the whole reason that Jesus died on a cross, so that we could know the God who made us and find fullness in him. True meaning, true purpose is found in the one who made us. And when we come to him, when we come back to God, suddenly we can enjoy pleasure and we can enjoy achievements and kindness to others, but they don't become our ultimate purpose. Our ultimate purpose is found in knowing the God who made us. And the wonder of this is that this is an eternal purpose, an eternal satisfaction that lasts even beyond the grave. Because just as Jesus went through death and rose to new life, so he promises that all those who know God too will enjoy that life forever. And so really the option is between a temporary purpose that will satisfy us a little bit for a little while, but will ultimately leave us empty, or an eternal purpose, the purpose for which we were made, the purpose where we find our place in that story of this universe, where we know the God who made us. Well, I'd love us to think about these things and to discuss them. Where do we find meaning in life? Could it be that this spark of eternity that God has set in our hearts is actually calling us home?